Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is September 24, 2021, and recently a commenter asked, why did Trump win the working class? And we're going to answer this question in today's video. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe and consider supporting us on Patreon. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So the first thing I'm going to say in this video is, we're whatever 20 seconds into this, and if you're already down in the comments typing Trump won the working class because ... whatever you think or whatever you've heard or read, stop. Because first of all, commenting without watching the video is always a really bad idea, and it's one of my pet peeves when I see people doing this. In this particular case, you're also wrong. Spoiler alert, Trump did not win the working class in either 2016 or 2020. So let's be clear on that. Also, Trump did not win the popular election in either 2016 or 2020. He only became president in 2016 because of the Electoral College. Now, of course, that matters and has real effects. But he didn't win the working class. In terms of this narrative of like Trump is so popular with working class people and blah, he isn't. He just isn't. And we're going to go through reams and reams of quantitative data. I mean, not excessively so, but I want to really break this down for people and show you from all angles what is going on in terms of U.S. electoral politics and the stories that we might be able to realistically tell using those data about what's actually going on politically in people's minds in the U.S. Because it's not exactly one-to-one. First of all, we know that about half of the electorate doesn't vote at all. What's on those people's minds and why aren't they voting? We can guess, but it's not entirely clear just from the election data. However, the election data do give us some pretty clear messages. And while there are elements of the Trump is popular with the working class going on there, it's not true across all demographics, so you need to get more specific. But yeah, basically, Trump isn't hugely popular with the working class, and he actually didn't win the popular vote in either election. So let's remember that going into this whole thing. So I have data here for this presentation on both the 2016 and the 2020 elections, which do get into a fair amount of detail. Let's start by looking in 2016 at voter turnout by family income. So this can tell us some things about who votes in the US. And it's a very clear-cut picture. The more money you have or make in a year, the more likely you are to vote, and kind of by a lot. You can see there that people or families making $5,000 a year are more likely not to vote than to vote. We don't have a 50% marker there, but it's pretty clear it's below the midway point between 60 and 40. And then it goes up steadily from there. Looks like families making $15,000 a year are more likely than not to vote, but then it just goes steadily up to, over 80% when you get to like $100,000 of income per year. You're almost definitely going to be voting. So we see that voter turnout is strongly skewed by family income, and we got to bear that in mind. So what does this mean? I mean, why do the wealthy vote, or, people who are well compensated annually, which tends to result, if you're making more money per year, you have more to save each year, you have more to invest. Maybe at some point you buy an apartment building or you buy a restaurant or whatever, you open a small business, you're more likely to be petty bourgeois at that point. The upper bracket here, this is 150 and up. So, that also includes the big bourgeoisie, who obviously are well over 150,000 a year. Anyway, you get the point. But this is a system by and for capitalists. The U.S. government is aimed at maintaining and managing capitalism. So there are few to no real options on the ballot for working people. So that's one reason why people at lower income levels wouldn't be voting at all or would be voting in fewer numbers. And also in the United States, we know that Election Day isn't a national holiday. So the less money you're making, the more likely you're in a really demanding sort of, manual labor type of job or a service job that you probably don't have a lot of flexibility in or something like that. Trying to juggle showing up for that job with family responsibilities and getting out to the polls, showing up to the polls, especially if it doesn't seem to make a difference in your life, no matter who's in office, then, because all of the candidates are there to manage the U.S. empire, then, it may not be a priority for you to turn out to vote. Also, we know, and I don't have these data here, but in the U.S., the lower your income level, the less likely you are to be affiliated with any groups, churches, or unions, or less likely you are to have any social engagement, like membership in community groups of any kind. So, lower civic engagement, I think you could definitely argue translates to elections in terms of people encouraging you. Oh, you should vote for this. Oh, I know this guy. He's running for this. Or, my friend's trying to get this on the ballot. Sign the petition, whatever. Or even just people reminding you, oh, hey, there's an election on Tuesday. So all of these reasons, I think, contribute to that reasonably based on what we do know. So also age, quickly, the older you are, generally speaking, the more likely you are to vote. I would say there's three basic distinct categories here. People 18 to 29 years old, that's the orange line or orangey yellow line on the bottom. In the middle, you have 30 to 44-year-olds. And then the two top lines are very similar. This is 45 and up, with that dark orange line being 65 and up. They're very close, and they kind of flip-flop at different points. But basically, if you're over 45, you're significantly more likely to vote than the other age groups. So the higher your annual income is and the older you are, that's who's more likely to show up to vote. Also looking at race and Hispanic origin. So white non-Hispanic. Across time here, we see these are the most likely people to be voting, and that's only been challenged or exceeded one time in 2012 by black non-Hispanic voters, who you can see there that the blue black non-Hispanic line rises steadily from 1996 to 2012. And of course, 2008 and 2012 were also the years that Obama was running. That may have been a factor. And then you see it drop off in 2016 pretty sharply. It goes back to the 2004, actually below 2004 levels, and then sort of trailing pretty significantly by 15 percentage points or more versus white non-Hispanic, our other race non-Hispanic, and then Hispanic. Those, again, are pretty close with each other, with, in most cases, not quite a majority of those demographics voting. So other things to keep in mind in terms of who votes in the U.S. These, again, are not overall demographics like from census data. These are people who vote. All right. These are things, in other words, why I'm pointing this out, we want to keep this in mind when we're trying to make generalizations about U.S. politics based off of elections data, is you got to keep in mind who we are talking about, i.e. who shows up to vote. All right, because that's who we have the data on. Now we're going to get into a little bit more specifics, and basically this is the first chart I'm going to show that has single variable information by candidate. And then finally, we're going to do in 2016 some multivariable, so intersectional analysis by candidate. But what you see on the screen, exit polls of the 2016 presidential elections, 2016, percentage of votes by income. So this really gets to the original question. Why did Trump win the working class? Well, in 2016, he clearly didn't. What we see under $50,000 is that Clinton won, and by a pretty wide margin. Under $30,000, Clinton got 53%, Trump got 41%. That's a 12-point difference. And then in the 30,000 to 50,000 bracket, Clinton got 51, Trump got 42. That's a 9-point difference. Then 50,000 and up, Trump beats Clinton every time, although by less. Trump wins 50%, Clinton 46 in the 50,000 to 100,000 bracket. And then it's much closer from there on. 100,000 to 200,000, Trump 48, Clinton 47, and then 49, 48, and then 48, 46. So it's super close after that point. And we know that there are way fewer people in those upper income brackets. So at that point, it's pretty much a toss-up for them. But you clearly see that lower income voters favored Hillary Clinton. Although, again, lower income voters were less likely to turn out, as we saw in the first thing. But so generally speaking, you have a population of working people who aren't going for the most overtly brazen, reactionary, racist thing. Now, of course, it's the fundamental task of the U.S. left to break with the Democratic Party and with all capitalist parties so that we can build an independent left. Now, why? Well, because the Democratic Party is an imperial party. They're out to maintain U.S. empire. That's really what they're there for. Just like the Republicans. The Republicans use a more reactionary type of social strategy for, who they are mobilizing behind their particular platform for managing empire. They use more overt racism. We'll see that reflected. They use more sexism, more appeal to, quote, traditional values, parentheses, of capitalism. Actual traditional human history really has nothing to do with male supremacy or anything that the Republican Party stands for, trad wives and all this stuff, anti-feminism. That's not actually traditional. It's, quote, small t traditional to capitalism, like in the last 200 years. But anyway, it's just such a limited and ignorant worldview. Anyway, and then the Democrats use their strategy. So the Democrats are an anti-socialist, anti-communist party. And of course, as a socialist channel, we want working people to recognize their true interests, which is standing up to capitalism and building socialism. We actually need to do that. That's why we do communist audiobooks here on the channel pretty much every day. So the Democrats, though, working for the 1%, the same 1% that owns and controls the Republican Party and is out to maintain U.S. empire and keep their system of profits and exploitation flowing, they don't want us to exist. They don't want socialists. They don't want Marxists out there. So they use a couple of different strategies to try to keep us down. And this is relevant in terms of Democratic appeal to would-be leftists. Okay, so one way that you can suppress a socialist movement is outright force. But that honestly takes a lot of work. You got to pay all the cops to do it and informants and all that kind of stuff. So, actually from like just a managerial sense, that's a somewhat inefficient way of trying to suppress a movement. So you use force where you have to. And definitely the capitalist class of the U.S. has been more than willing to use force to suppress the movement, whether it's, just throughout 20th century history in particular, although also 19th century history. Just 20th century is where it got a little more developed in terms of workers' movements as proletarianization, more people ended up in the working class and capitalism, further developed and more people became wage workers, etc. Anyway, what's easier for them is to pick us off. So when people start becoming politically aware and they start thinking about what are my political and economic interests, well, what's easiest for the Democrats is to vaguely approximate socialist demands. Like, what is it that's appealing about socialists? And so they take out everything but the really threatening elements, like, things that directly challenge the bourgeoisie's power, that really challenge capitalists' power. But, they can make some social democratic promises of better conditions and benefits and national plans and more public this and more that, while leaving the same basic system intact. And they have done this decade after decade, generation after generation. And by the time that people realize that they're just lying, that they actually deliver about 2% of what they are promising. And meanwhile, the socialist organizations are over here underpopulated because all the people got picked off and pulled into the Democratic Party. Well, by that time, people get so disillusioned and burned out by being lied to and thrown around in the Democratic meat grinder, that they get burned out and they get pissed off, and they wind up fading into the background and becoming non-political for a while. And then, of course, some get more radicalized and realize, hey, we need to break with the Democratic Party and join a socialist organization. But there's much less money. There's much less momentum in the socialist organizations. Plus, you got the cops cracking down on you if you ever do get serious or effective or, get some significant numbers, etc. But the point being that the Democrats have been mimicking socialist promises while, basically going to that fundamental point of taking away capitalist power and initiating actual socialism. They don't want that. They'll shit talk that, and they'll have people believing that any effort to actually do that results in, horrible tyranny and whatever else that they sell to people. But this is part of I would say the main way that they have kept socialist movements down in the U.S. That, and they've also gutted labor law such that it's practically impossible to form a labor union anymore. So all these main planks of a socialist movement, they've been working against them. But the key point here being that they are less overtly racist in terms of the rhetoric that they use. Again, their promises and their rhetoric do not match their performance. But for people who are only marginally involved in or educated on politics, it might take you 10 or 20 years to really see that. I think now, in the age of neoliberal austerity, it's getting plainer and plainer and more obvious. But this has been the case, over the last 50 years easily, is that, they use force to suppress where they can. They pick us off with promises. So when we see people who are at lower income levels voting Democrat, it's not entirely irrational that they're doing that. If you haven't undertaken a real course in imperialism and really seriously studied democratic foreign policy or anything else, you might not make the connection. You might say, well, they're talking about this and the Republicans are talking about that. So I would say, being a little bit charitable, but I would say it's reasonable to think that, those lower income people voting Democrat are doing so out of a desire for progressive change rather than, trying to maintain the U.S. imperial apparatus. That said, even working people in the U.S. do benefit from the U.S. imperial apparatus, lower gas prices and stuff like that. There are benefits to it. But by and large, people do not like war and so on. Whereas you have a party that's openly reactionary, that is attracting a different crowd. Hopefully we can agree on that. And I think I've gotten into every nuance I can think of. So let's move on to some more single variable analysis in 2016 of who went for Clinton and who went for Trump. So unfortunately, I realized due to the resolution, you're not going to be able to read the screenshot that I took. I'll read it to you. Unfortunately, this was, I had to make it really small to just fit everything on the screen for my ease of use. Anyway, this breaks down who went for Clinton and who went for Trump by sex, by race, by age, by income, by union membership, by party, by political philosophy, and by most important political issues. So let's go right through it. Sex. Men went for Trump and women went for Clinton. So Trump got 52% of the men vote, Clinton 41%, and Clinton got 54% of the women vote, Trump 41%. Again, remember, Clinton won the popular vote. So, yes, Trump was more appealing to men and Clinton was more appealing to women. Now on race, how does this break down? This is a bigger split. White people went for Trump, 57 to Clinton's 37. So there is a clear trend there. And this holds true across Republican candidates. Again, we're just thinking about Trump here. That was the original question. You could do additional analysis on the Republican Party as a whole. Then African American, Clinton, 89%, Trump 8%. Huge split there. Hispanic voters, Clinton 66, Trump 28, another gigantic 2-to-1 split. Asian voters, again about the same split, 65 to 27. and other races, Clinton 56, Trump 36. So Trump got his ass handed to him in every racial, ethnic, demographic except for whites. So as far as Trump's, killing it with the working class, that doesn't remotely hold true. I mean, first of all, we already showed that, less wealthy voters definitely did not vote for Trump in the majority. But even of those who did, it was just whites only. Like, we're talking single digits for black voters voting for Trump, 8%. So, yeah, when we say working class, you got to be careful that you don't fall into the trap of when you say working class, meaning white men. But that's kind of actually so far what we're seeing here. All right, now moving on to age. How did this shake out? So Clinton got, of the 18 to 29 age bracket, 55%, Trump 36. That's a wide margin. In the 30 to 44 age bracket, Clinton again wins handily, 51% to 41. In the 54 to 64, Trump wins. And this is basically, they break it down. I don't know why they even bother almost with the split between 64 and 65, because like we saw, the stats are almost identical. Anyway, 45 to 64, you get 52 to 44, Trump to Clinton. And then age 65 and over, 52 to 45, Trump to Clinton. So significant. Older people voted for Trump. All right. Income. Under 50,000. We were looking at this before. Clinton wins that, 53 to 41. 50 to 100. Trump edges her out by 3 points. And then 100,000 and over, they are even at 47-47. So, again, who are you calling working class? Right. All right, so union households. 51 for Clinton, 43 for Trump. So, again, 8-point margin, pretty big. And then non-union households, much closer, 48 for Trump, 46 for Clinton. So we know that Republicans are opposed to unions, generally speaking. Any of the right-to-work measures, generally speaking, are not coming out of the Democratic Party. There may be ineffectual resistance. Most of that is being pushed by Republicans. So as much as both these parties do implement and manage U.S. empire and have basically identical foreign policies, like, in effect, there are differences in the way that they appeal to and try to manage the domestic economy somewhat. So going on to party, Democrat, Clinton killed 89 to 8. Republican, Trump killed 88 to 8. And then independents, 46 to Trump, 42 to Clinton. Close, and Trump still lost, but close. So clearly very, very partisan vote there. Not a lot of crossover appeal between parties. So political philosophy, liberal, moderate, conservative. Now, we would have to assume here that socialists are going to be closest to what in U.S. politics are called liberal, which tends to mean the more left liberal positions. If somebody wants to challenge me on that, I mean, make it good, because you're trying to say that, oh, people who watch Fox News, there's like working class people making 40,000 watching Fox News. Yeah, but the views that they're absorbing are thoroughly bourgeois. You know what I mean? Whereas liberal, which in this case doesn't just mean capitalist, they mean more left liberal by that. And that's just clear. That's not really up for debate. Because again, like I said, the Democratic Party has been trying to pick off socialists with watered down social democratic promises. So again, we would be closer to that. Things that regulate capitalism, that restrain capitalists' power. It's not socialism, but, because before we get into that whole discussion again, but closer in that the conservative approach is give capitalists more power. Okay? So you got to say, for the purpose of reading these polls and interpreting these data, which is closer to where we're coming from as socialists. Okay. So liberals, 84% for Clinton, 10 for Trump. Moderates, still a majority for Clinton, 52. Trump got 40. Conservatives, 81% to Trump, 16 for Clinton. I guess those are the, more of the diehard neocon types or something. Most conservatives, you want to talk about opportunism. All they really care about is the bottom line. They don't care about who gets hurt, whatever. Most of them will just go along with whoever is going to cut their taxes the most. So, yeah. Anyway, lastly, most important issues. How did we see a breakdown here? So for people who prioritized foreign policy, they went with Clinton 60 over Trump's 33. Presumably this is, the she's experienced approach. That was probably what I heard the most. On immigration. Now, if you say that immigration is your most important issue, that can mean different things. Probably in a U.S. context, it means that you want to get rid of, quote, those damn immigrants or whatever, or you believe the migrant caravan story or whatever. So on people who are most concerned about immigration, 2-1 Trump to Clinton, 64 to 33. Now, for those who said immigration and voted for Clinton, my guess is that many of them, probably not all, because we know, Clinton was building her own version of the wall and whatever else. But the promises that Democrats make on immigration tend to be more, we're going to have a humane policy, etc. Again, like I said, their promises and their results do not line up, but that is what they talk about. And a lot of times for voters, all they ever hear is what's promised, and people don't necessarily follow the news and find out, how did that promise turn out? If you're listening to this channel, you probably do, which is why, years of intense thought led you to becoming a socialist, etc. But for a lot of people in the U.S., that's simply not true. Now, last two are economy and terrorism. People most concerned about the economy, most voted for Clinton, 52% versus Trump's 41%. Well, what does that mean, you're most concerned about the economy? Probably that you're struggling. That would be my guess. That would be why you're not trying to vote for the party that is trying to give as much possible freedom to capital as possible, again, at least in their promises. Whereas, the 41% who voted for Trump, I don't know what they were thinking. Trump did make promises about NAFTA and whatever else. He didn't do jack shit on any of them, was an obvious fraud, obvious charlatan. There should be a 10,000 year moratorium on voting Republican. But, nevertheless, you get people falling for those right populist promises. Then terrorism. People most concerned about terrorism voted Republican. If you want to understand that, a couple of weeks ago, I posted 9/11 videos, 9/11 truth. This was a major lie that the U.S. government pushed in order to start not just a war, but an entire era of wars, an entire framework for starting multiple wars based off of the scary Muslims are going to get us. And if you go back to the 2000s at all, I have some clips. I may do a follow-up on those 9/11 videos, but there's a montage. I'm tempted to show it now, but I'm going to save it for that other video. From the 2004 Republican Party National Convention, which incidentally was held in New York City specifically to capitalize on 9/11 and the terrorism trauma that they had been reinforcing every hour of every day since 9/11 in order to whip the public into a pro-war frenzy. The entire thing is like they just cut out the parts where they said war, terrorism, danger, terrorists, etc. And they had half the country, half the electorate at least, just foaming at the mouth about terrorism. So, here we are in 2016, terrorism obviously not a major issue in terms of day-to-day life, yet you still get people claiming it as their most important issue. And of course, they're going to go Republican, because while the Democrats went along with that, that was a Republican-led initiative, to be sure. And again, we have all the Islamophobia coming out of that, racism, and that was clear and without a doubt a product of the Bush-Cheney years and a very specifically socially engineered phenomenon around that. All right, so those are some single variable breakdowns. Let's do our last one on the 2016 election. This is multivariable, intersectional. We're going to look at a combination of gender and income. So this is broken down by male and female voters, and then within each of those, income levels. What do we see on the female side? Now that's an interesting story. At every level of income, female voters went for Clinton. And by a pretty wide margin, and by an increasing margin at the higher income levels. Why is that? Well, from what I know about Clinton voters, I know one in particular, highly educated professional woman, about the same age as Hillary Clinton, so came up through the same historical challenges, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, breaking the glass ceiling, trying to be an intelligent, highly educated professional woman, and dealing with the old boys club who in the 70s and 80s, didn't want women coming into the office buildings and having to change their culture and all of that kind of stuff. And I know that a lot of those women see a lot of themselves in Hillary Clinton because she is that liberal feminist ideal of succeeding within capitalism as a woman, which this was, again, a late 20th century battle that Hillary Clinton typifies, the pinnacle of success. I mean, she's the wife of a president, of course, but also achieved success in her own way. And for women like that, Trump is basically everything that they were fighting in all of their battles as liberal feminists. Trump, the sleazy beauty pageant owner, and just everything else that he represents, is everything that was trying to hold those women back within capitalism. So not surprising at all the way that curve went. But again, Trump was not popular with women at any income level. So at least over Clinton. Now we go to the male side, and this is much closer at every income level. There's just a much closer margin between them. So initially when I looked at this, it looked like a different pattern versus the female pattern. But looking at it, it's actually pretty much the same trends, just mashed closer to the middle. In other words, if you look just at the Trump curve, the red curve, it starts higher and then drops off with the higher income levels. And then on the Clinton side, it starts lower and curves up towards the higher income levels. It's basically the same. So in other words, if you took the graph of the male thing, and you took the blue and moved it over to the right, or conversely, you took the red and moved it over to the left, you'd almost have the same picture as on the female side. If you see what I mean, they're just crossing over each other at a different point. Like basically, if you drew that curve out, it would go upwards off the screen on the female side. Then those would converge into an X. It would just do so off the chart, right? Whereas on the male side, they cross in an X, but towards the middle of the chart. Overall, though, same general shape. Why is that? I would say, I don't have data on this here, but it's easily verifiable, that we know that people are more likely to vote further left with educational attainment, and that generally speaking, there are individual exceptions, and it varies depending on what you're educated in. But generally speaking, educational attainment and income are linked. For example, I remember looking at data on the 2000 election, and educational attainment, clear linear relationship between that and likeliness to vote for Gore over Bush, and then Nader over Gore. So this, may be having something to do with that. Now, the thing to understand is, yes, Trump did win with men making $100,000 and less. And it actually increases a little bit as you get down to the poorer men. Although, again, we're not just talking about all men, because think back to the data on race being broken down, Clinton versus Trump. 88 or 89% of black voters went for Clinton, and then 2 out of 3 Hispanic and Asian voters went for Clinton over Trump. So we're really talking primarily and overwhelmingly about white men, for me to add a third variable here, gender, income, and race and ethnicity. That's mainly who we're talking about. So who is, in other words, one of the bulwarks of reaction in the United States? White men who aren't making a lot of money. How did they get there? Why do they hold these views? We're going to get to that later, and that's a whole topic in and of itself. But we're wrapping up the 2016, and I'm about to pivot to 2020. I don't want to do too many conclusions at this point. We're going to compare the 2020 data against the 2016. But we see there, again, what have we learned? You know, we can summarize it all, but this thing is interesting that, you know, like Trump said, I love the poorly educated. He did win with less affluent men, and actually with very poor men, more so than middle-income men. That's interesting. Where did these men come from? What did they see in him? What do they see in the Republican Party? Is it desires for socialism, or are they hopelessly confused? And I would go more towards the latter. And what do we as socialists do about that? Because if you have too much of something, generally speaking, you have two options for dealing with that and trying to equalize it. You can either try to reduce that thing, and with the stubbornness, the insanely irrational stubbornness going on in that demographic, I would say that trying to reduce their numbers, in other words, converting them to other political ideologies, that's going to be a pretty hard, energy and effort intensive task. The other thing that you can do if you have too much of something is add more of everything else so that it's not standing out so much. To me, that seems like the easier and more obvious logical thing to do because, well, we're looking at voters here. Half the people didn't vote at all. And then we see that clearly, who are we appealing to? The proletariat as socialists, dispossessed people who don't have any capital, wealth, you know, that kind of thing. People whose interests it is to abolish private property. Well, that's clearly lower income people who tend to go as far left as they can. Okay, well, seems to me like that's the easy move and the sane and rational move. All right, let's get into the 2020 data, though. Here's a chart from Equitable Growth titled High Income Individuals Are Far More Likely to Vote in Both Midterm and Presidential Elections. So the top, the blue chart, shows the midterms, 2014 and 2018. And you can see clearly the 2018 turnout is overall higher in every income bracket, but it goes up steadily in both 2014 and 2018. The higher your income is, the more likely you are to have voted. People making over $75,000 in 2018 were about 76% likely to have voted, whereas in 2018, people making under 40,000 were about 49% likely to have voted. Then in the presidential years, 2016, we already looked at earlier. We have the 2020 data here, and it tells a very similar story. The more money you made, the more likely you were to vote. People making over $75,000 were about 90% likely, maybe a little under 90% likely to have voted. And if you're making under 40,000, you were maybe 65% likely to have voted. So there you go. When we talk about elections, we are definitely seeing higher turnout from higher income individuals. So the next chart here, middle and high income black individuals voted about the same rate, regardless of state vote by mail policies. So we're bringing in a couple of other pieces of information about 2020. So this breaks it down by income and by race, at least in terms of white voters versus black voters specifically, not looking at other races or ethnic considerations. Now, they also bring in the voting by mail piece. Of course, 2020 was a pandemic year. Voting by mail, we know from other data that lower income people are more likely to vote when the vote by mail is an option for reasons probably that I discussed earlier, which is it's hard to get to the polls, particularly if you're working like 10-hour days or something. But anyway, what we're looking at here is that there's not really a difference between black voters' participation between 40,000 to 75,000 and over 75,000. They participated at about the same rates, whereas you can see in the white voters, there's more of a gradient. So when we say, again, that there is a gradient to the higher your income is, the more likely you are to vote, that doesn't hold true for every single racial demographic. So this is why intersectional analysis is important, is that you can't just go with the top level category and just say we're good, because you're going to miss some potentially really important pieces when you add multiple variables together, multiple statuses together, is going to give you a much richer story that is going to help you actually engage with people much better. When we talk about a project as large as building a movement for socialism in the United States, this is a monumental task. And just trying to be class reductionist does not work. Obviously, we do want a class revolution, but if you don't look at the factors that are actually keeping capitalism in place, you're not going to pull it up. You know what I mean? It's a lot smarter to look at what actually is going on within different subsets of the system that you're trying to upend. It's just logical. And, not only is it insulting to people not to have their particular story told, meaning if you just lump all, quote, working people in together, well, we see that there are significant subsets of the working class which are not getting with the program. They're not on the same page that everybody else is on. And I'm talking specifically about white men, who in this case went for Trump, went for a much more overtly reactionary line. You try to build a social movement around them, or even just including them without addressing the fact that, like, hey, they're one of the most likely working class demographics to fall for a fascist line. I guarantee that is going to be a failure of a movement, which is outright dangerous to other participants in that movement. So think, McFly, think, use your head here. But anyway, let's go back to that overall income data broken down by candidates. And we see the exact same thing that we saw in 2016, except in the middle income bracket, Biden actually had more crossover appeal. What we saw with Clinton was that she won a clear majority, just like Biden won a clear majority, with people under 50,000 a year. And 57 to 42 is not even close. That's 15-point spread right there. Trump got trounced in the people making under 50,000 category overall. Then we go up to people making between $50,000 and $100,000. It's almost the exact same story. It's 2 points closer. Biden 56, Trump 43. Still a 13-point spread. Forget it. And then Trump only wins, and by a similar but again shrinking proportion, 54% versus Biden's 43%. That is only 11 points apart. So we see the same thing, that the higher you go in income, the more of a convergence there is. We saw that in 2016 too. But what does that tell you? Again, as socialists, we're trying to reach the proletariat, who overall, overwhelmingly go Democratic. And I would say that most likely they do that because Democrats have poached many socialist type positions, and actual socialists have been neutered and taken off the menu for a long time. We're trying to change that now using social media as we're doing here and on other channels like this one. Use the technology that we have to build the movements that we can. Again, I use the hashtag Revolution 2030, and it means we can build, if we really put our shoulder into it, a significant communist movement by 2030 in the US and probably everywhere. Anyway, but how? How are we going to do that? You try to center it around reactionary white men. No. It's dangerous for other people, and I think they have these intractable positions. It's like they're just married to it, and it's just very irrational. Where you have other people acting in other demographics a lot more out of like more rational self-interest. So those people are going to be easier to talk to. They're just more natural allies. Let's not make this harder. And again, I put a lot of blame for that skewing to the right in quote unquote socialist or, left of the Democrats, quote unquote, populist media. I think a lot of that is driven by media figures who are pandering to the right to get cash, plain and simple. You see it in BreadTube too. People, you make more money when you don't do real socialism. When you go more towards liberal and reactionary positions, that's where the money is, because that's where the wealth is in this system. It's that simple. That's how you make the money. All right, moving forward here. So now we have broken down who votes for whom. We did some single variable analysis. We did some multi-variable or intersectional analysis. There's this other conversation going on about patriotism and nationalism, and that people are trying to resurrect the failed Browderist, Earl Browder-driven strategy from yesteryear in the Communist Party USA, which was such a failure. Earl Browder got kicked out of the Communist Party USA, and they tried to just move on and be like, we're just going to pretend that never happened. But this whole idea of like communism is the real Americanism, it's just not a fight you're going to win. I saw a commenter just saying this thing does not have legs. Like, people have tried this. It's never taken off, and it's never going to. Look at who actually wants left-wing policies and who are the natural economic allies of socialists and communists. Who would actually benefit from private property being abolished? Just go there. Anyway, so let's talk about patriotism. Who is most likely to hold patriotic views? Well, there's a Gallup poll, pretty recent one, about this. It's from 2019, and quoting from the Gallup narrative on this story, Washington, D.C. This 4th of July marks a low point in U.S. patriotism. For the first time in Gallup's 18-year history, we have a fair amount of data on this, asking U.S. adults how proud they are to be Americans. Fewer than a majority say that they are extremely proud. Currently, 47% describe themselves this way, down from 51% in 2017, and well below the peak of 70% in 2003. So the graphics on the screen, this is the first of 4 graphics I'm going to show you. And what do we see? We see that prior to 9/11, the figure was 55%. Then in 2002, 2003, 2004, this massive, again, why did I put up the 9/11 truth videos? You need to understand what happened in the 2000s if you want to read, for example, this chart correctly. All right. Massive jingoistic, nationalistic push. This is when everybody started getting little American flags to mount on their SUVs, drive around like a fucking clown show. This is when that started. 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005. We see that there's this huge spike in, quote, patriotism. What is it really? Jingoistic nationalism. It's pro-war. It's they hate us for our freedoms. It's I eat freedom fries, not French fries, because the French aren't even supporting our imperialistic nonsense at this point. And it goes up to 65, 69, 70, 69, 61%. But that's not patriotism, not really. It's this artificially inflated bubble of George Bush and Dick Cheney told me that if I don't have 18 US flags on my car and I don't say that I, love America 91 times a day, then the evil terrorists are going to pop out of their holes, and blow away the nice white folks in my Nebraska suburb. That's what that is. So you want to understand patriotism in the USA, it is directly linked to severe pro-war bullshit. So anyway, after that, it settles down in the later 2000s to 57, 58%, and it's basically at that level through most of the late 2000s, early 2010s, and then it just goes down from there. 2013 is 57, and then it drops 54, 52, 51, and then 47, 2018 into 2019. So that's the general curve. I would say, why is that? Things have not been going well for the US. It's hard to be extremely proud of the US. You see millionaires and billionaires getting richer while everyone else is basically unable to do basic life things and meet their needs. So let's go to the next graphic. Fewer than 1 in 3 Democrats are extremely proud to be Americans. So this breaks it down by Republicans, independents, and Democrats. Nice little red, white, and blue touch there, Gallup. Good job. What do we see about who's most likely to be proud to be an American? Well, Republicans, 70% or better, like right around 70%. 71% in 2013, 68% in 15 and 16, 72% in 2017, and 74% in 2018 because, hey, Trump, right? So that's, you got to look at what's actually behind this patriotism. Is it, as some Browderists have been saying, people are patriotic about the struggles of working people in the U.S.? That isn't really what I see here at all. If you look at some pretty obvious historical trends and where the line goes up and where the line goes down, well, yeah, it's pretty clear that that's not what they meant. In fact, I lost the link. I'm not sure what I was looking at, but if anybody can find it, let me know. But I was looking previously at some other patriotism polling data that also asked people, what's your level of support for the military and police? And guess what? Patriotism and support for police and military were strongly linked. So what kind of patriotism is it? Is this sort of left-leaning, I love the Battle of Blair Mountain kind of patriotism, or to the extent that that even exists? I don't know how people even cook that up to try to sell it to other people. It's insane. Nobody even knows labor history in this country. What are you talking about? No, it's the garden variety jingoism and nationalism. It's bourgeois nationalism, obviously. It's not even getting into the whole question of the United States as a country founded on genocide and slavery and everything else. Just let's use our heads here. All right. So Republicans, very high, better than 2 out of 3 Republicans at all times in the last 7 or 8 years have been extremely proud to be American. And then Democrats and independents, about the same, hovering around 50%. And then in later years, 16, 17, 18, dropping 45%, 43%, 32% for Democrats. Now, of course, this probably has to do with Trump. And there, was a very negative media campaign about Trump. But let's be honest. Also, there was a lot of negative reality about Trump. Trump was clearly trying to further the growth of a fascist movement, just as we are out here trying to rally support for socialism, obviously without the help of the Democratic Party, which is an anti-socialist party. But it works differently when you're trying to get a, quote, radical movement in support of capitalism. That's different. You can get funding and free media time for doing that. And that's what Trump did. And naturally, that's hugely alarming to people who consider themselves opponents of such a thing, to see it succeeding at a level which is unprecedented in recent decades. This is the most successful that the far right's been. And I would say, why? Well, because capitalism's in a deep crisis, and this is the strategy that capitalists, like other capitalists before them in the USA, have come up with as a strategy. We have done a series on fascism here on the channel, looking at the original fascism in Italy in the 1920s that came out of at the end of World War I, after the imperialist powers were exhausted from fighting with each other over who was going to get the biggest share of the loot of carving up other nations that they were going to be plundering under imperialism. There was a revolutionary moment where Italian workers arguably could have had a revolution and set up, the Soviet Republic of Italy, and they didn't. And fascism was a response to that. The bourgeoisie was like, hell no, we're going to make a counter movement that is more than just punitive. In other words, they weren't just out to harass, torture, and drive underground the socialist movement, although they did do some of that. What they also wanted to do was make a counter movement, which would be similar in energy. It would have a certain radical energy, that would say, we're fed up with the status quo. But then in reality, what it actually did was it co-opted all that would-be radical revolutionary energy into support, radical, quote, revolutionary support for traditional elements in the status quo. You get a lot of that in the US. I mean, you see it even among people, the things that they say that they're mad about sometimes, and then come to completely the wrong conclusions about what their interest is in doing in that. It's got that same kind of co-opted fascist backwardness to it, where it's like, in other circumstances, you might have wound up a communist for, sort of how fired up you are about issue X, Y, or Z. But then the bourgeoisie has played with your head so much through all of their various far-right media channels and everything else that they do, the mega churches, which are another major right-wing project, and they have convinced you to spend all that would-be revolutionary energy on their far-right nonsense, which is going to mire you deeper and deeper into the quicksand of collapsing capitalism. And yeah, as much as I would like to throw a rope out to these people, and in fact, I put these videos, these audiobooks, and these analyses out on YouTube for free. You do not have to show your socialist credentials to watch these videos. They're free for all. That's why the channel is Socialism for All. It's accessible. Right-wingers are welcome to watch these videos and learn. The problem is they're not willing to do that. Anyone who is, if you're interested in changing your mind and getting actually educated, you're welcome to do that. Just like if I wanted to go learn to be a right-winger, I could watch Charlie Kirk and Ben Shapiro, and I could learn that language, and I could learn those takes and that interpretation, and I could do that. But I choose not to because I reject it. It's nonsense. It's afactual, and it's not in my economic interest to do that. Looking at the class structure of America and whose interests are represented in the media, those aren't my interests. My interests are in socialism. I would benefit more from abolishing private property than perpetuating it. And so would those poor white men making under $25,000 a year who voted for Trump. A majority of those men voted for Trump. They're objectively wrong. It's not in their interest to do that. However, they've been convinced that it is. And I cannot wave a magic wand and undo that. However, they're welcome to watch these videos if they would like that perspective. But that's not really what's happening. And, some of that is an effect of the anti-intellectualism that is baked into the fascist curriculum that they're being spoon-fed. So let's just be clear about blame here. because you hear that too of the right-wingers pretending to be socialists, trying to blame the left for alienating these people. I'm sorry, no one made them adopt the views that they have. No one. They are gravitating towards it, and trying to say otherwise is just ignoring a very long history of racism in the U.S. The country is literally built on it. And it's built on the buy-in of whites, many whites who have bought into it in one way or another or turned a blind eye to it. And that does include almost all whites have turned at least a blind eye to it. The number of white people who have been actively involved in anti-racism is vanishingly small in the U.S. You know, just anytime you hear somebody trying to center a socialist movement on that or even prominently feature it there, it's grift. I can only assume it's grift. No serious socialist would do that. All right. So you can see patriotism falling off among the more left-leaning sectors of the population who don't openly embrace the most reactionary options out there. And then political liberals. So this is not a party affiliation per se. Obviously, conservative to liberal generally tracks with Republican to, the days of the moderate or liberal Republican, are definitely gone, although there definitely are some conservatives in the Democratic Party. Some would be probably a huge understatement. Anyway, political liberals. So arguably the people closest to socialists, obviously they don't, share the view that, the bourgeoisie needs to be confronted and removed from power, but on many, probably basic stances about capitalists have too much power, probably most likely to agree out of these groups of conservatives, moderates, and liberals. I would like to see a poll on that. Do capitalists have too much power? Anyway, so same basic thing. Conservatives, it's very much almost identical to the Republican line, though it's down a few points. Moderates, well, true to the name, it's right in the middle, although even they have fallen to less than a majority in 2018. And then liberals, so not necessarily Democrats, but just people who picked the leftmost option out of those three. Are you a conservative? Are you a moderate? Are you a liberal? Socialist or communist was not an option there. People who picked liberal, 23% as of 2018. Is some of this the Trump effect? Yeah, probably. But you see the line's been dropping since 2013. So that's quite a while. And in fact, it went from 51% in 2013 to 41% in 2015. So in the span of 2 years, it dropped 10 points. And that was really before Trump even came on the scene, although he was lurking, in the background of the Tea Party. Wasn't quite MAGA yet at that point. It was still the Tea Party and the birther thing and all that stuff. But really, it's been going steadily down since then by about 5 points a year, and then even more sharply between 17 and 18. So we want to talk to people most likely to join a socialist movement. They're also some of the least likely to say that they're extremely proud to be Americans. So tell me this patriotism thing one more time. Let's do one last graphic on this. This is extremely proud to be an American by subgroup, so we can break this down more single variables. So we can do an analysis by sex, men versus women. So in every year, except for 2017, men have been more likely to say that they are extremely proud to be an American by about 4 or 5 points. And then women, the biggest dip there is in 2018, arguably a Trump-type effect because of, again, the sleaze and those sort of anti-feminist values. Feminism, such as it is in the U.S., tends to be of the more liberal persuasion, although even that, it doesn't take much, commitment as a feminist to be offended by the kinds of values that Trump represents. And that's, you want to come at me for being a liberal for saying that? No, because that wouldn't have a place in socialism either. So keep it to yourself. And if that is what you think, I would re-examine where you learned your socialism, actually. So breaking it down, white versus non-white also, again, every single time, whites more likely to say that they're extremely patriotic than non-white people in the US. 2013, it's 61% versus 47%. And then in 2018, the white sense of patriotism has dropped overall, 54% down from that 61%. And then non-white, it's dropped even further from 47% in 2013. It's down to 33% 5 years later in 2018. So you're talking about the most oppressed people in the labor hierarchy. I mean, whites versus non-whites. Non-whites definitely are at the lower end of the labor hierarchy in U.S. capitalism. And again, that's because the U.S. capitalism has been built on genocide, racialized slavery, racial segregation, on and on, in all the forms that it still persists to this day. So, yeah, least likely to say that they are patriotic. And then there's a breakdown by age. Young people, the least likely to say that they are patriotic. And that holds consistent across time. The older you are, with, I just see one exception there, I think. 2016, people 50 to 64 are more likely than older people to say that they're proud. And who knows, maybe that was, all the election turmoil and how divided people were. Maybe people who were older were, thrown by, why can't we all just get along kind of thing. Otherwise, generally speaking, the younger you are, the less patriotic. And that's been true across time. And again, so 33% among the upcoming generation, 18 to 29 as of 2018. Do we see a trend? People aren't into it. All right. And then college graduate versus non-college graduate at every step of the way in the last, the 5 years shown in this poll. College graduates less likely, not by a lot in most of the years polled, but by at least 4, 5, 6 points less patriotic. Why is that? I don't know. Maybe they know more about history. That would be my guess. Also, people, and this is something when we talk about racism also, why do whites, and especially poor whites, tend to gravitate towards those reactionary positions that, try to reward their whiteness and their enforcement and clinging to those kinds of racial prejudices and that racial hierarchy? Because when you don't have anything else, when you don't have an education, when you don't have standing, when you don't have money, what do you cling to? You cling to what you got. And although, we could certainly argue as socialists that it would be far better for them to unite with the rest of the proletariat, abandon their fascist leanings, and join with the rest of the proletariat, for the abolition of private property and so on. And, that would actually help them more overall. They're clinging to the white privilege thing. They're clinging to what little, and I would say it's because it's more immediate. They have the white privilege now versus some future thing that they might fight and sacrifice for and not get. They got the white privilege now, and they're clinging to that. So you have another idea, let me know. But I have definitely read things to that effect that I found compelling. So we see in every case more educated people, younger people, non-white versus white, more liberal versus more reactionary. You see less tendencies towards patriotism. And again, even picking apart what is that patriotism we're talking about, it's the same patriotism that goes through a huge uptick when there's a massive pro-war push in the 2000s. So this is, I think, definitely bourgeois nationalism, not some sort of deep-rooted, the pride of the American worker kind of thing. I think it's definitely bourgeois nationalism. You have some other idea, let me know. But I don't know. To me, this is very clear. So I think at this point, I'm going to conclude the presentation. Let me know what you think in the comments. I will honestly say, to me, it's surprising that we are having to have this conversation at all. I thought that people who read enough about socialism and the history of imperialism and labor history, I thought that people in that group would kind of take this stuff for granted. I don't know why we're having to show it again, although, again, my suspicion is that what it is an influx of people pandering to the right in the, quote, independent alternative media who are dredging up this nonsense and trying to form alliances with people who clearly are opposed to socialism and are not in harmony with the rest of the proletariat, which is thinking more about our economic self-interest and more of an anti-imperialist stance, in some of the better, more learned and more principled segments of which is also in solidarity with the proletariat of the developing world. And we recognize that it's not, you may be struggling in the U.S. I'm struggling in the U.S. hard. The U.S. has serious problems that really reduce lifespan and really just crush your dreams and hopes in the U.S. Also, though, being a prole in the U.S. is not the same as being a prole in Africa or in Latin America, etc. So, again, to me, I thought that this was like fairly clear and would be clear to people. But if you see people kind of stirring up, I think muddying the waters and trying to confuse people, hopefully these data and this analysis might be helpful to you in trying to make some counterpoints. We'll take it from here. This may be an ongoing discussion. I wasn't expecting this patriotism thing to pop up at all. So who knows what they're going to come up with next that we're going to have to relitigate, even though like 90% of people in the movement are basically already on the same page about this. All right. Thanks for listening. Seriously, thanks for listening. This was a very data-heavy presentation. And thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. You can support for as little as $2 a month. If you'd like to support without making a financial donation, just liking, sharing, subscribing, clicking the notifications bell, leaving a comment for the algorithm, all of that helps to boost the channel and helps more people to see this content, helps to expand the conversation about ending capitalism and building socialism in its place. Whatever it is that you do online and in your community in pursuit of those goals, thank you for doing it, and we will catch you in the next video.